A crying puppy was surrounded by vultures. Then a lone horse galloped in, changing everything in an instant. Nature can be cruel, but sometimes it surprises us with moments of unexpected heroism. What drove this lone horse to risk everything for a dying puppy? The answer reveals a story more extraordinary than anything you could imagine. What you're about to witness isn't just a rescue. It's a miracle that defies the very laws of nature itself. The tiny puppy shivered in the ditch, its matted fur caked with mud and blood. Abandoned on a desolate country road, its desperate whimpers had gone unanswered for days. With each passing hour, the puppy's cries grew weaker. Its little body trembled not just from hunger, but from a fever that burned through its fragile frame. Those innocent eyes, once bright with life, now clouded with fear and confusion. Why would anyone leave me here? The puppy's eyes seemed to ask, as it struggled to stand on wobbling legs, only to collapse again in exhaustion. Each labored breath revealed protruding ribs, a grim countdown of how little time remained. In one final, desperate attempt, the puppy summoned what little strength it had left and let out a heart-wrenching howl that echoed across the empty landscape. A sound so pure in its suffering that it seemed to pierce the very heavens. But the puppy's cries weren't just attracting help. They were drawing in something far more sinister. The first shadow passed silently over the puppy's trembling form, a fleeting darkness that the exhausted animal barely registered. Then another, and another. High above, the vultures had been watching, patient, calculating. Their keen eyes had spotted the weakening creature hours ago, and now they began their methodical descent, spiraling downward in ever-tightening circles. Nature's cleanup crew was reporting for duty. The largest bird landed first, about 20 feet away. Its naked, wrinkled head turned with mechanical precision as it assessed the situation. Soon, 5 more joined it, forming an ominous semicircle around the ditch. Their heavy wings folded against their bodies as they took deliberate, unhurried steps forward. The vulture's arrival was eerily silent. No screeches or calls, just the occasional soft rustling of feathers. This silence was somehow more terrifying than any sound could have been. These weren't predators that killed with dramatic flourish. They were patient opportunists, nature's undertakers, simply waiting for the inevitable. One vulture stretched its impressive 6-foot wingspan, casting an even larger shadow across the puppy. The bird's eyes, dark and emotionless, reflected nothing but ancient instinct. These creatures had been performing this same ritual since prehistoric times, unmoved by the suffering before them, concerned only with the sustenance it would provide. The puppy's eyes widened in terror as it finally understood what was happening. It tried to bark, to scare them away, but could only manage a pathetic whimper. Its tiny heart raced frantically, pumping what little energy remained through its failing body. A primal fear, coded into its DNA from ancestors who had faced similar threats, surged through its system in one last desperate attempt at survival. One bold vulture hopped closer, its razor-sharp beak gleaming in the harsh sunlight. The hooked tip, perfectly evolved for tearing flesh, opened slightly as if in anticipation. The others followed, emboldened by the puppy's weakness, their shadows now completely engulfing the tiny animal. The circle tightened with methodical precision, the birds now close enough that the puppy could smell their distinct, unsettling odor. A mixture of decay and something uniquely vulturine. The ditch, which had been the puppy's prison of abandonment, was now becoming its final resting place. The irony was cruel. The same isolation that had doomed the puppy now meant there was no one to witness its final moments. No one to intervene in this harsh, natural process. The world would continue turning, indifferent to the tiny life about to be extinguished. What the terrified puppy couldn't know was that its final moments were about to take an extraordinary turn. That somewhere beyond the ridge, something was approaching that would defy the very laws of nature and probability. Something that would transform this scene of inevitable death into something altogether different. A distant rumble disturbed the vulture's calculated advance. At first, it was barely perceptible, a vibration more felt than heard through the parched earth. The birds paused, their primitive instincts registering the anomaly before their conscious minds could process it. The rumble grew stronger, rhythmic, purposeful. Over the ridge came a magnificent sight. A powerful chestnut stallion, its muscular body gleaming with sweat in the afternoon sun. Its eyes, wild with determination, fixed on the scene below. The horse's nostrils flared wide, pulling in great gulps of air as it charged forward at full gallop, mane flowing like liquid fire against the azure sky. This was no ordinary horse. Anyone familiar with the area would have recognized Thunderheart, a once domesticated stallion that had escaped captivity years ago and now roamed the countryside as a solitary figure. Local farmers spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Admiration for his untamable spirit, frustration for his occasional raids on their hay stores. The stories of Thunderheart's escape had become local legend. 3 years ago, during a violent thunderstorm that had rattled windows for miles around, the stallion had broken free from the stables of a wealthy but cruel owner. The lightning had spooked him enough to summon strength beyond what anyone thought possible, splintering the heavy wooden door of his stall. That night, as rain lashed down and thunder cracked overhead, the horse had found his freedom, disappearing into the wild landscape that bordered the estate. Since then, he had been spotted occasionally, a fleeting shadow against the horizon, a flash of chestnut among the trees. Some claimed he'd gathered a small herd of wild mares. Others insisted he remained solitary, too proud to join even his own kind. Whatever the truth, Thunderheart had become something more than just a horse in the minds of local residents. He was freedom incarnate, a symbol of defiance against captivity and cruelty. But what was driving this lone horse toward a scene that should hold no interest for it? Horses were herbivores, with no stake in the life or death of a small canine. There was no evolutionary advantage, no logical explanation for what happened next. The vultures, sensing the approaching threat, reluctantly spread their massive wings, preparing for a hasty retreat. But Thunderheart was faster than their calculations allowed. With a speed that defied his massive size, the stallion barreled into their midst, rearing up on powerful hind legs, his front hooves slashing through the air with terrifying precision. The birds scattered in a chaotic explosion of feathers and indignant squawks. One particularly stubborn vulture, perhaps too invested in its anticipated meal, hesitated a moment too long and received a glancing blow from the horse's hoof that sent it tumbling through the air. Dust swirled around the scene like a miniature sandstorm, catching the late afternoon sunlight and creating a golden halo around horse and puppy. The contrast was striking. The massive, powerful stallion towering over the tiny, broken form of the abandoned pup. David and Goliath, but allies rather than adversaries. Standing protectively over the puppy, Thunderheart pawed at the ground and released a challenging neigh that echoed across the landscape, a sound that carried both warning and defiance. The message was unmistakable. This puppy is under my protection. The vultures regrouped at a safe distance, their ancient brains struggling to process this unprecedented intervention. In their millions of years of evolution, They had never encountered a horse that would risk injury to protect a dying puppy. A creature outside its species, outside its herd, outside any logical framework of natural behavior. One vulture, perhaps older or more persistent than the others, made a tentative approach from the side, testing the horse's resolve. Thunderheart responded with lightning reflexes, spinning and kicking out with his hind legs, missing the bird by inches, but making his intentions crystal clear. The vulture retreated, joining its confused companions in their frustrated vigil. As minutes passed, the standoff continued. The vultures, governed by patience and opportunism, seemed willing to wait out this strange development. But Thunderheart showed no signs of abandoning his post. If anything, his posture became more determined, his eyes scanning the horizon as if calculating his next move. Below the massive hooves of its unlikely guardian, the puppy's eyes flickered open. Its tiny tail, motionless for hours, twitched weakly. Something impossible was happening, something miraculous. The puppy, sensing safety rather than danger above it, made a feeble attempt to lift its head. Its small pink tongue emerged, desperately trying to moisten cracked and dry lips. Dehydration had taken a severe toll on the tiny body, and without water soon, even this unexpected intervention would prove futile. As if understanding this urgent need, Thunderheart lowered his great head toward the puppy. His soft muzzle gently nudged the small creature, an impossibly tender gesture from such a powerful animal. The horse's breath, warm and sweet with the scent of grasses, washed over the puppy, seeming to infuse it with a momentary strength. Then, with a decisive snort, Thunderheart did something even more remarkable. Carefully, with a precision that belied his massive size, he maneuvered his muzzle under the puppy's tiny body. The pup whimpered, a sound of confusion rather than fear, as it felt itself being lifted from the ditch that had been both its prison and nearly its grave. And this was only the beginning of the most unlikely friendship nature had ever witnessed. A bond that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal behavior. A story that would eventually travel far beyond this desolate country road to touch hearts across the world. Cradled precariously in Thunderheart's gentle grip, the puppy dangled like a fragile ornament as the stallion began to move. Each step was measured, deliberate, a stark contrast to the charging gallop that had scattered the vultures moments before. The great horse moved with the careful precision of a mother carrying her newborn, his powerful muscles now controlled with exquisite restraint. The vultures, still perched at a distance, watched this bizarre procession with their ancient, unblinking eyes. One by one, they seemed to accept defeat, spreading their massive wings and lifting off into the darkening sky. Their shadows, once harbingers of death, now passed harmlessly overhead as they dispersed to seek easier prey. The last of them circled once more, as if memorizing this strange tableau for some avian folklore to be shared at future gatherings. As Thunderheart carried his tiny charge away from the ditch of despair, the landscape gradually transformed. The barren roadside gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrubby vegetation. The earth here told stories of seasonal floods and prolonged droughts, a harsh cycle that had sculpted the terrain into something both beautiful and unforgiving. The stallion's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust with each careful step. His ears flicked back and forth, constantly monitoring his surroundings for potential threats. Though he had lived wild for years now, the instincts of his domesticated ancestry occasionally surfaced. A wariness of certain sounds, a tendency to follow what had once been human trails. But these behaviors were now overlaid with the sharp survival instincts he had developed during his time in the wild. The puppy, meanwhile, drifted between consciousness and oblivion. Its tiny body, severely weakened by days without proper nourishment, responded to the rhythmic movement of the horse with occasional twitches. Once, it let out a small whimper that caused Thunderheart to pause momentarily, adjusting his grip with surprising tenderness before continuing onward. Thunderheart followed a path known only to him, winding through scrubby underbrush and around rocky outcroppings. The landscape here was harsh, a forgotten corner of the world where beauty and brutality coexisted in equal measure. Twisted juniper trees, gnarled by wind and drought, provided occasional patches of shade. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the terrain, turning the world amber and gold. A jackrabbit, startled by their approach, darted across their path in a zigzag pattern before disappearing into a thicket. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its keen eyes missing nothing of the unusual scene below. The natural world seemed to hold its breath as this unprecedented partnership made its way across the wilderness. The journey was not without its challenges. At one point, Thunderheart had to navigate a steep embankment, carefully picking his way down the loose shale while maintaining his precious cargo in a stable position. Another time, he encountered a narrow ravine that required a calculated jump, a maneuver he executed with such precision that the puppy barely registered the momentary sensation of flight. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, the horse and his improbable cargo arrived at a small hidden valley, a microclimate that seemed to defy the surrounding desolation. Here, protected by steep walls of weathered stone, a small spring bubbled up from underground, creating a modest but life-sustaining oasis. Lush grass grew in a circle around the water source, and a few hardy wildflowers added splashes of color to the scene. The valley was nature's secret garden, invisible from the surrounding terrain and accessible only through a narrow passage between two towering rock formations. These natural sentinels had been shaped by millennia of wind and water into forms that resembled ancient guardians, their weathered faces seeming to approve of the strange visitors now entering their domain. This was Thunderheart's sanctuary, his private kingdom away from human interference. The spring had sustained him through seasons of drought, its waters never failing even when the larger rivers in the region ran dry. Now, it would serve a new purpose. The afternoon light filtered through the high walls of the valley, creating dappled patterns across the grass. A family of quail scattered at Thunderheart's approach, their distinctive topknots bobbing as they disappeared into the underbrush. Nearby, a cluster of desert primrose displayed their delicate pink blooms, having found enough moisture here to thrive despite the harsh climate beyond the valley's protective embrace. With extraordinary gentleness, the stallion lowered his head and deposited the puppy on a soft patch of grass beside the spring. The tiny creature whimpered as it touched the ground, its body still racked with the effects of dehydration and abandonment. Its eyes, barely open, registered the shimmering water just inches away, but it lacked the strength to reach it. The puppy's coat, which might have been white under different circumstances, was matted with dirt and debris from its time in the ditch. Its ribs showed prominently through its skin, evidence of days without nourishment. One ear stood partially erect, while the other flopped forward, a quirk that gave the small creature an endearing, lopsided appearance despite its dire condition. Thunderheart observed the puppy's distress with what could only be described as concern, an emotion that science would insist was impossible for a horse to feel toward another species. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The stallion's eyes, deep pools of liquid brown, remained fixed on the small form. His nostrils flared slightly as he sniffed at the puppy, perhaps assessing its condition in ways humans could never fully understand. After a moment of apparent contemplation, the stallion dipped his muzzle into the spring, letting water fill his mouth, then turned to the puppy and let the life-giving liquid dribble out beside the tiny animal's head. The water caught the late afternoon sunlight, transforming into liquid diamonds as it fell in a gentle stream. The sound it made as it hit the ground, a soft pattering barely audible even in the valley's profound silence, seemed to rouse something in the puppy's failing consciousness. At first, the puppy could only lie there as water pooled around its muzzle. Then, instinct took over. Its small pink tongue emerged, lapping weakly at the moisture. Each tiny sip seemed to bring a fraction more strength, a spark of life returning to its diminished frame. Thunderheart repeated this process several times, patiently transporting water from spring to puppy until the small creature had consumed enough to slightly revive it. The horse's actions displayed a level of problem-solving and empathy that defied conventional understanding of equine behavior. There was purpose in his movements, intention in his care. As the puppy drank, a subtle change came over it. Its eyes, previously half-closed and dull, began to show a glimmer of awareness. Its breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, steadied into a more natural rhythm. Though still desperately weak, the infusion of hydration had pulled it back from the precipice of death. After ensuring the puppy had drunk its fill, Thunderheart grazed nearby, never straying more than a few feet from his charge. Occasionally, he would return to check on the small creature, gently nudging it with his soft muzzle as if encouraging it to hold on, to fight for survival. As evening approached, the temperature in the valley began to drop. Desert regions were known for their extreme temperature variations, and without protection, the night chill could prove as dangerous to the weakened puppy as the day's heat had been. Sensing this new threat, Thunderheart then lowered himself to the ground, folding his long legs beneath him in a protective semicircle around the puppy. His large body blocked the evening breeze that had begun to stir, creating a pocket of warmth in which the puppy could rest. The horse's massive frame dwarfed the tiny dog, creating a living fortress against the encroaching cold and any predators that might venture into the valley under cover of darkness. His body heat radiated outward, enveloping the puppy in life-sustaining warmth. As darkness fell across the hidden valley, an unlikely pair huddled together under the emerging stars. A magnificent wild stallion and a discarded puppy, defying all natural laws that should have kept them separate. The horse occasionally nickered softly, as if reassuring the puppy that it was safe, that the nightmare of abandonment and vultures was over. The sounds of night gradually emerged around them. The chirping of crickets, the distant call of a coyote, the soft rustling of nocturnal creatures beginning their daily routines. These ordinary wilderness sounds seemed to take on a different quality in the presence of the extraordinary bond forming between horse and puppy. The puppy, too exhausted to question this strange turn of events, simply surrendered to the comfort of the moment. For the first time since being cruelly tossed from a moving vehicle days earlier, it slept without fear, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath against the protective presence of its equine savior. In sleep, the puppy's paws twitched occasionally, perhaps chasing dream rabbits or running through imaginary fields. Once, it let out a tiny bark, a sound so soft it was almost inaudible, before settling deeper into slumber. These small signs of normal puppy behavior were perhaps the most hopeful indicators that recovery might be possible. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to a miracle of compassion that transcended species and instinct. The constellations, ancient and unchanging, had looked down upon countless natural dramas throughout the ages, but surely few as remarkable as this one. The Great Bear, the Hunter, the Seven Sisters, all seemed to shine with particular brightness on this night, as if heaven itself was acknowledging the extraordinary scene below. Something extraordinary had begun in this hidden valley, something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the natural world and the barriers between different forms of life. A connection that defied explanation had formed between two creatures that should have been strangers to each other. And as the moon rose to illuminate the sleeping figures below, it seemed to cast a blessing on this most improbable of partnerships, bathing horse and puppy in silver light that transformed them into a living sculpture of hope and redemption. The first light of dawn crept into the hidden valley with gentle persistence, painting the eastern rock face with hues of pink and gold before spilling onto the valley floor. Dew glistened on every blade of grass, transforming the modest oasis into a sea of diamonds that sparkled with prismatic brilliance. A gentle mist hovered just above the spring, creating ethereal wisps that danced and swirled with the morning's first tentative breeze. Thunderheart awoke first, raising his noble head to assess their surroundings with the vigilance that had kept him alive since his escape to freedom. His ears rotated like radar dishes, cataloging the morning sounds, the distant call of a meadowlark, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, the soft bubbling of the spring. A family of quail moved in formation along the valley's edge, their bobbing topknots visible above the taller grasses. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote's yip signaled the end of its night hunt as it retreated to a den for daytime rest. The stallion's nostrils flared, drawing in the complex tapestry of scents that told stories invisible to human senses. The musky trail of a rabbit that had cautiously approached during the night before, detecting their presence and veering away. The sweet perfume of desert flowers opening to greet the sun. The mineral-rich aroma of the spring water as it emerged from deep within the earth. Satisfied that no danger threatened, he turned his attention to his tiny companion. The puppy still slept, curled into a tight ball against the horse's warm flank. During the night, Thunderheart had shifted position several times, always careful to maintain the protective cocoon around the fragile creature. Twice, he had been alerted by the puppy's whimpers, dreams, perhaps, or pain from its injuries. And each time, he had responded with a gentle nickering that seemed to soothe the small dog back into peaceful slumber. Now, in the revealing light of morning, the full extent of the puppy's condition became apparent. It was a mixed-breed dog, probably no more than 8 weeks old, barely weaned from its mother before being discarded like unwanted trash. Its predominant features suggested a shepherd lineage, with perhaps some retriever mixed in, breeds known for their loyalty and intelligence. The coat, matted and filthy though it was, showed patches of cream and gold beneath the grime. One ear stood partially erect, while the other flopped forward in an endearing, lopsided manner that would have charmed any human with a heart. Its paws were disproportionately large for its body, a sign that, if it survived, this puppy would likely grow into a medium to large-sized dog. The tail, tucked tightly against its body now, bore a white tip that contrasted with the darker fur of its length. Around its eyes and muzzle, lighter fur created a mask-like pattern that gave the puppy a perpetually inquisitive expression, even in sleep. But it was the puppy's physical state that told the more urgent story. Ribs protruded sharply beneath its skin, each one clearly visible, creating a ridge-like appearance along its sides. The hip bones jutted prominently, and the spine formed a sharp ridge along its back. Patches of fur had been rubbed away, leaving raw spots that spoke of days spent struggling in the ditch. Dried blood matted the fur in several places where sharp rocks or debris had pierced the skin. Most concerning was the right hind leg, which lay at a slightly unnatural angle, possibly broken or severely sprained during the traumatic ejection from whatever vehicle had been the instrument of its abandonment. A swelling around the joint suggested inflammation, and the paw on that leg appeared to be more tightly curled than its counterpart, indicating possible nerve involvement. As if sensing the assessment, the puppy's eyes fluttered open. Unlike the previous evening, when they had been clouded with the haze of approaching death, they now showed a spark of awareness. Two pools of warm brown that blinked confusedly at the massive creature beside it. The eyes, though still lacking the vibrant energy of a healthy puppy, held intelligence and a questioning curiosity about this strange new situation. The puppy's first instinct should have been fear. Every evolutionary instinct should have triggered alarm at the proximity of such a large animal. Wild dogs and horses were not natural allies. In the wild, they occupied different ecological niches and rarely interacted except in competition or predator-prey relationships. Yet something deeper seemed to override this natural response. Perhaps it was the memory of rescue, or simply the desperate need for warmth and protection. But the puppy showed no sign of terror. Instead, it attempted to lift its head, a small whimper escaping as the movement triggered pain from its various injuries. Thunderheart responded immediately, lowering his muzzle to gently nudge the puppy, as if encouraging it to remain still and conserve its strength. The horse's breath, warm and sweet with the scent of grasses, washed over the puppy in a comforting wave. His whiskers, those sensitive tactile organs that horses use to explore their world, brushed against the puppy's fur with exquisite gentleness, a touch that conveyed concern without causing discomfort. The horse then rose carefully to his feet, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid startling his small charge. Each massive hoof was placed with precision, creating minimal vibration in the ground beneath the puppy. Standing at his full height, the stallion stretched his powerful limbs, shaking off the stiffness of night before walking to the spring to drink deeply. The morning light caught his chestnut coat, highlighting the rippling muscles beneath and the subtle variations in color. Darker along the mane and tail, lighter across the barrel of his chest. A white blaze ran down his face, ending in a pink muzzle that dipped into the clear water of the spring. His tail, a luxurious flag of hair that nearly touched the ground, swished lazily at flies that had begun to stir in the warming air. Water dripped from his muzzle as he returned to the puppy's side. With the same ingenuity he had displayed the previous evening, Thunderheart collected water in his mouth, then released it in a small pool within the puppy's reach. The sight was extraordinary. A wild stallion transformed into a nurturing caretaker, meeting the most basic needs of a creature that, by all natural laws, should have been nothing to him. The puppy lapped eagerly at the offered water, its strength marginally improved from the night before. Its small pink tongue darted in and out, creating tiny ripples in the improvised drinking pool. Occasionally, it would pause, as if gathering energy for the simple but vital task of hydration. After each pause, it would resume with renewed determination, instinct driving it to consume what its body so desperately needed. When it had drunk its fill, it made a valiant attempt to stand. The front legs cooperated reasonably well, pushing against the soft earth and lifting the front half of the body. For a brief moment, the puppy balanced on its forelimbs, the rear still resting on the ground. Then, with visible effort, it attempted to bring its hind legs under its body. The left leg moved sluggishly, but responded to the brain's commands. The right leg, however, remained stubbornly uncooperative. A sharp yelp of pain echoed through the valley, sending a pair of startled doves fluttering from a nearby rocky perch. The puppy collapsed back onto its stomach, panting from the exertion and the pain. Its eyes, momentarily bright with determination, now clouded with confusion and distress. It tried once more, achieving the same partial rise before the injured leg betrayed it again. This time, the yelp was more subdued, a resignation to its current limitations. Thunderheart watched the puppy's struggles with what could only be described as concern. His ears flicked forward, focusing on the sounds of distress. His nostrils flared as he detected the subtle chemical signals of pain that the puppy's body released. After a moment, he moved away to graze on the lush grass surrounding the spring, though he remained within a few yards of the puppy, glancing back frequently as if to ensure it hadn't attempted another painful experiment in mobility. The stallion's grazing was methodical, his strong teeth tearing the grass with efficient movements. Occasionally, he would pause to raise his head and survey their sanctuary, an instinctive behavior that had served his wild ancestors for millennia. His tail swished rhythmically, keeping the increasing number of insects at bay as the morning warmed. As the morning progressed, the sun climbed higher, bringing warmth to the valley. Shadows retreated, and the full splendor of the hidden oasis revealed itself. Wildflowers that had been merely shapes in the dawn light now displayed their colors: purple lupins, orange globe mallows, and delicate white evening primroses that had not yet closed their nocturnal blooms. Butterflies, attracted by the floral display, flitted from blossom to blossom, their wings adding moving accents of color to the scene. The puppy, seemingly encouraged by this natural comfort, began the painstaking process of cleaning itself. Though still too weak for a thorough grooming, it managed to lick some of the dirt from its front paws and face. Each small movement appeared to require enormous effort. Yet there was a determination in the tiny creature that mirrored the indomitable spirit of its equine savior. The process was slow and frequently interrupted by necessary rest periods. The puppy would clean one paw for a minute or two, then lay its head down, exhausted by even this minimal exertion. After resting, it would resume, focusing on a different area. Gradually, patches of its true coat color emerged from beneath the accumulated grime, warm golden fur with subtle variations that caught the sunlight. Hunger soon became the next challenge. Water had revived the puppy temporarily, but without nourishment, recovery would be impossible. The puppy's stomach growled audibly, a sound that seemed impossibly loud from such a small body. It licked its lips repeatedly, instinctively seeking to address a hunger that had been its constant companion for days. As if understanding this dilemma, Thunderheart approached the puppy again, this time with a different purpose. He began to graze the tender grass immediately surrounding the small dog, systematically clearing a circle around it. His powerful teeth sheared the vegetation with precision, creating a natural clearing that would allow the puppy to see and be seen more easily. Then, with extraordinary precision, he used his teeth to pluck several of the softest, most tender shoots, dropping them directly in front of the puppy's nose. The selected grass was the most nutritious in the valley, the new growth that contained the highest concentration of proteins and essential nutrients. It was the same grass that Thunderheart himself sought out when grazing, instinctively recognizing its superior food value. The gesture was remarkable enough, but what followed demonstrated an even more profound understanding. When the puppy sniffed at the grass, but made no attempt to eat it, its carnivorous nature rejecting what its companion found sustaining, Thunderheart seemed to reconsider. The stallion stood motionless for several moments, his eyes focused on the puppy, his ears forward in an expression of intense concentration. It was as if he was processing the problem, analyzing the rejection, and seeking an alternative solution. After this period of apparent contemplation, Thunderheart turned his attention to the edges of the spring. There, in the muddy shallows, tiny creatures moved about their business. Water insects, small amphibians, and most importantly, minnows that darted in the clear water. These small fish had established a population in the isolated spring. Their ancestors perhaps transported as eggs on the feet of water birds that had visited this hidden oasis over the years. With a patience that defied his wild nature, Thunderheart watched the movement of these potential food sources, his eyes tracking their patterns with uncanny focus. He stood absolutely still, a statue of muscle and intent, only his eyes moving as they followed the darting movements below the water's surface. Even his breathing seemed slow, as if he understood that any disturbance might scatter the tiny fish. Then, with a precision that would have impressed the most skilled human fisherman, the stallion plunged his muzzle into the water at exactly the right moment, coming up with something wriggling between his lips. Water cascaded from his face as he lifted his head, catching the sunlight and creating a momentary rainbow effect. He moved quickly to the puppy and deposited his catch on the ground before it. A small fish, still flopping weakly on the grass, its silver scales flashing in the sunlight. The puppy's reaction was immediate. Instinct overcame weakness as the scent of potential food triggered ancient hunting responses. With surprising quickness, it pounced on the fish with its front paws, managing to pin the slippery creature long enough to deliver a killing bite. The meal was consumed with the desperate enthusiasm of the truly famished, bones and all disappearing in a matter of seconds. Only a small smear of scales and a tiny spot of blood on the grass remained as evidence of the puppy's first meal in days. After consuming the fish, the puppy licked its lips repeatedly, savoring every molecule of nourishment. Its eyes, previously dull with exhaustion, now showed a hint of vitality. It looked up at Thunderheart with what could only be described as expectation, a silent request for more of this life-sustaining offering. Thunderheart watched this process with what appeared to be satisfaction before returning to the spring's edge. His fishing technique, already impressive, seemed to improve with each attempt. He began to target the slightly larger minnows, perhaps understanding that they would provide more sustenance for his hungry companion. His timing became more precise, his selection more deliberate. Over the next hour, he repeated this fishing expedition several times. Each success met with the same enthusiastic response from the puppy. By mid-morning, the small dog had consumed enough protein to visibly improve its alertness, though the physical damage from its ordeal would require much more time to heal. Between meals, the puppy rested, conserving its limited energy for the essential tasks of eating and occasional self-grooming. Its breathing had become deeper and more regular, no longer the shallow panting of extreme distress. Once, it even attempted to wag its tail when Thunderheart approached with another fish, a small gesture that spoke volumes about its improving condition. As the sun reached its zenith, the temperature in the valley began to climb. The morning's pleasant warmth gave way to the more intense heat of a desert midday. The insects grew more numerous and more persistent, buzzing around both horse and puppy with increasing determination. Thunderheart, displaying yet another facet of his remarkable caretaking, positioned himself to cast a shadow over the puppy, providing natural shade against the intensifying heat. His large body created a moving umbrella that tracked the sun's progress. ensuring that the puppy remained protected from the direct rays that could quickly dehydrate its already compromised system. The puppy, its immediate hunger satisfied and its thirst quenched, drifted back to sleep in this protective penumbra, its tiny body beginning the hard work of healing. In sleep, its breathing fell into a rhythm that matched the gentle rise and fall of the spring's surface as small breezes rippled across the water. Occasionally, its paws would twitch, chasing dream prey perhaps, or running through imaginary fields on 4 good legs instead of 3. Thunderheart remained vigilant, dividing his attention between grazing and protection. When a hawk soared overhead, casting a moving shadow across the valley floor, the stallion's head shot up immediately, tracking the potential threat until it passed beyond the valley's boundaries. When a small rattlesnake emerged from between 2 rocks to sun itself, Thunderheart deliberately moved between the reptile and the sleeping puppy, pawing the ground in warning until the snake retreated to its rocky shelter. And so the first day of this improbable partnership established its rhythm, a dance of nurturing and recovery that defied natural order, yet seemed somehow perfect in its execution. The horse and puppy, thrown together by circumstance and connected by compassion, had begun a journey that would transform them both in ways neither could imagine. As the afternoon progressed, life in the valley continued its ancient patterns around the unusual pair at its center. Bees harvested nectar from the wildflowers, their buzzing creating a gentle soundtrack to the day. Lizards emerged to bask on sun-warmed rocks, their scaled bodies absorbing the heat they needed to remain active. A family of ground squirrels went about their business at the valley's edge, occasionally standing on hind legs to assess the strange newcomers before returning to their foraging. In the wider world beyond the valley's protective embrace, such a relationship would be deemed impossible. A fantasy born of human sentimentality rather than natural law. Scientists would dismiss it as anthropomorphism, the attribution of human characteristics to animals incapable of such complex emotions as compassion and altruism. Biologists would insist that cross-species nurturing occurred only within narrow parameters, usually involving mammals with similar social structures or appearance. Yet here, witnessed only by the silent stones and whispering grasses, impossible was proving to be merely a word, not a limitation. In this hidden pocket of wilderness, far from human observation and academic debate, 2 unlikely companions were writing their own rules of engagement, creating a bond that transcended biological imperatives and evolutionary programming. As the sun began its westward descent, painting the valley in a warm amber light, the puppy awoke once more. Its eyes, clearer now than they had been at any point since its rescue, took in its surroundings with new awareness. When it spotted Thunderheart grazing nearby, its tail gave a definite wag, weak still, but unmistakable in its meaning. The day was ending, but something new had begun, a fragile hope taking root in the most unlikely of partnerships. As days melted into one another, the hidden valley became a sanctuary of recovery and connection. The rhythm of life for the unusual pair settled into patterns dictated by necessity and growing understanding. Each sunrise brought new strength to the puppy and deeper commitment from its equine guardian. The passage of time was marked not by human calendars, but by subtle changes in the valley itself. The gradual shift of shadows as the sun's path altered slightly each day. The changing constellations that wheeled overhead each night. The slow transformation of certain wildflowers as they progressed from bloom to seed. The mornings began with a gentle awakening as dawn light filtered through the valley's eastern entrance. Thunderheart would typically rise first, stretching his powerful limbs before moving to check on his small companion. These first interactions of the day carried a particular tenderness. The stallion's soft nickering seemed almost like a morning greeting, and the puppy's responding tail wag acknowledged the connection that had formed between them. By the third day, the puppy had progressed to attempting short crawls using its front legs and left hind leg, dragging the injured right limb behind. These movements were clumsy and clearly painful, but they represented critical progress. Each attempt seemed to require enormous concentration. The puppy's face set in an expression of determination that belied its young age. Its first successful journey, a distance of barely 2 feet, was followed by exhaustion so complete that it slept for nearly 3 hours afterward. Thunderheart observed these efforts with what appeared to be encouragement, nickering softly when the puppy managed to cover even a few inches of ground. He would often position himself at the finish line of these crawling attempts, providing both a destination and motivation for the struggling puppy. When the small dog finally reached him, Thunderheart would lower his head and gently nuzzle the puppy, a gesture that seemed to communicate approval and pride. The fishing expeditions continued, becoming more efficient with each passing day. What had begun as an improvised solution had evolved into a sophisticated hunting technique. Thunderheart had refined his approach to the point where he rarely missed his target, and he seemed to understand exactly how many fish the puppy needed at each feeding. He had even begun to time these meals with remarkable consistency. Early morning, midday, and evening, establishing a routine that provided structure to their days. The small fish population in the spring seemed adequate to sustain this hunting, perhaps because the horse was careful to take only what was needed. He appeared to target primarily the larger minnows, leaving the smallest to continue breeding and maintaining the ecological balance of the spring. This selective harvesting, whether instinctive or deliberate, ensured that their food source remained sustainable. The puppy's body was responding to this regular nourishment. Its ribs still showed, but less prominently, and a layer of healthy fat had begun to develop beneath its skin. Its coat, though still patchy in places where injuries had occurred, had regained some luster. Most noticeably, its eyes had developed a brightness that spoke of returning vitality, the dullness of near death replaced by the alert curiosity natural to a young dog. On the 5th morning, a significant breakthrough occurred. The valley was particularly beautiful that day. A recent brief shower had intensified the colors of the wildflowers and brought forth a chorus of frogs from hidden pockets around the spring. The air carried the fresh scent of wet earth and vegetation, a pleasant change from the usual dry desert aromas. The puppy had been attempting to stand several times a day, always with the same result: success with the front end, failure with the rear. But this time, something was different. After the usual collapse when weight shifted to the back legs, the puppy paused, as if reassessing its strategy. Its eyes narrowed in concentration, and its breathing became more deliberate. Then, with visible determination, it tried again, this time keeping all weight on the left hind leg while holding the injured right leg slightly elevated. For a brief, magnificent moment, the puppy stood on 3 legs, wobbly and uncertain, but upright nonetheless. The achievement was written in every line of its small body. The slight trembling of muscles unaccustomed to this configuration, the careful balance maintained by subtle shifts in position, the focused expression as it processed this new perspective on its world. Though only inches higher than its crawling position, this elevation seemed to represent a monumental shift in the puppy's self-perception. Thunderheart, who had been grazing nearby, raised his head sharply at this development, his ears pricked forward in apparent interest. He abandoned his grazing immediately, moving closer to observe this new development. His attention seemed to give the puppy additional confidence, for it attempted something even more ambitious: movement. With painstaking care, the puppy shifted its weight forward onto one front paw, advanced the other, then brought the single functioning hind leg forward in an awkward but effective hop step. It repeated this sequence 2 more times before losing balance and tumbling back to the ground. But the achievement was monumental. For the first time since its abandonment, the puppy had walked, not crawled, but walked, under its own power. The stallion approached immediately, lowering his great head to nuzzle the puppy with surprising gentleness. His breath ruffled the puppy's fur, and his soft whickering seemed to carry approval. The small dog responded with a tentative lick to Thunderheart's muzzle, the first truly reciprocal gesture of affection between them. Something shifted in that moment, a progression from rescuer and victim to something approaching partnership. The remainder of that day saw multiple attempts at standing and walking, each slightly more successful than the last. By sunset, the puppy could manage 5 or 6 steps before resting, a distance that might have seemed trivial in its previous life, but now represented a triumph of will over circumstance. Thunderheart remained close during these practice sessions, his presence seeming to provide both encouragement and security. That night, as darkness enveloped the valley, the 2 companions settled into their now familiar sleeping arrangement. The puppy curled against Thunderheart's warm body, the horse positioned to provide both warmth and protection. But there was a subtle difference in their positioning. The puppy, rather than lying in the passive posture of the invalid, now curled in the more natural sleeping position of a healthy dog. And Thunderheart, while still protective, no longer needed to create a complete shelter around his charge. They slept not as rescuer and victim, but as companions who had chosen each other's company. As the first week drew to a close, the puppy's personality began to emerge from beneath the trauma of its ordeal. Free from the constant pain and fear that had dominated its existence, its natural temperament could finally express itself. It revealed itself to be naturally curious and remarkably resilient, with an intelligence that manifested in increasingly complex behaviors. When not sleeping or eating, it would watch butterflies with intense concentration, its eyes tracking their erratic flight patterns with remarkable focus. It would paw at passing beetles with playful intent, not to harm, but to engage with these interesting moving objects. The valley's small creatures seemed to sense that this predator was not currently a threat, for they went about their business with minimal concern for its presence. Once, it even attempted a clumsy pounce at a grasshopper, forgetting momentarily about its injury until the inevitable painful reminder. The yelp that followed contained as much surprise as pain, a clear indication that the puppy was beginning to think of itself as whole again, only to be confronted with the reality of its limitation. Thunderheart responded to this distress call immediately, appearing at the puppy's side within seconds, offering comfort through his presence. The puppy's vocalizations had also evolved. What had begun as merely whimpers of pain now encompassed a range of sounds. Short, sharp barks of excitement, longer howls of frustration when its body wouldn't cooperate with its intentions, and softer, almost purring sounds of contentment during quiet moments with Thunderheart. Each sound seemed to communicate a specific emotional state, creating a vocabulary of expression that the horse appeared to understand. Thunderheart, meanwhile, had settled into his role with extraordinary dedication. He seemed to understand exactly what the puppy needed at any given moment. Shade during the hottest parts of the day, warmth when desert nights turned cool, regular hydration and nourishment. His attentiveness never wavered. Yet it was not the anxious hovering of early days, but rather the consistent presence of a committed caretaker. Most remarkably, he had begun to adapt his own routine to accommodate his small charge, grazing in ever-decreasing circles around the puppy rather than ranging across the valley as he normally would. Wild horses typically cover significant ground while feeding, moving constantly to find the best grasses. Thunderheart's decision to limit his range represented a significant modification of natural behavior, a conscious choice to prioritize proximity to the puppy over optimal feeding. This adaptation came with subtle costs. The grass immediately surrounding their regular resting place had been cropped short by Thunderheart's constant grazing, forcing him to travel slightly further each day to find adequate nutrition. Yet he never strayed beyond visual range of the puppy, maintaining a vigilant awareness of his charge even while meeting his own needs. The 8th day brought another milestone. The morning dawned clear and cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of distant rain, a teasing promise of moisture that might or might not reach their valley. The puppy, now able to stand and move on 3 legs for short periods, had been practicing its mobility with increasing confidence. Each day brought greater coordination and stamina, though the injured leg remained stubbornly useless. On this particular morning, the puppy seemed especially determined. After waking and receiving its morning fish meal from Thunderheart, it spent several minutes stretching and flexing its functioning limbs, almost as if preparing for an athletic endeavor. The horse observed this ritual with apparent interest, his ears forward and alert, his eyes tracking each movement. Then, with deliberate intent, the puppy turned toward the spring. The water source lay approximately 15 feet from their usual resting place, a distance that had previously required Thunderheart's assistance to traverse. The puppy regarded this expanse for several moments, seemingly calculating the challenge. Then, with a determined set to its small shoulders, it began to move. The journey was neither quick nor graceful. The puppy's 3-legged gait was awkward, requiring constant adjustments to maintain balance. Every few steps, it would pause to rest, its chest heaving with the exertion. The injured leg occasionally dragged against the ground, causing momentary winces of pain. But the puppy pressed on, driven by some internal resolve that transcended physical discomfort. The journey of approximately 15 feet took nearly 10 minutes of determined effort, with frequent rest stops along the way. Thunderheart followed at a respectful distance, neither interfering nor assisting, but maintaining a protective presence. His behavior suggested an understanding that this journey represented something important for the puppy, a test of independence that needed to be completed without intervention. When the puppy finally reached the spring's edge, it stood for a moment on trembling legs, surveying the water that had previously been delivered to it by its caretaker. Then, with careful movements, it lowered its head and lapped directly from the spring, no longer dependent on Thunderheart's water deliveries. The water rippled beneath its eager tongue, creating concentric circles that expanded outward across the surface, a fitting symbol for the expanding capabilities of the small dog. The triumph was evident in the puppy's demeanor as it drank deeply from the fresh, cool water. Its tail, previously held close to its body during most activities, now raised slightly in the canine expression of accomplishment and pleasure. Even its ears seemed more alert, standing as upright as their floppy nature allowed. The horse observed this independence with what could only be described as pride, his ears forward and alert, his posture attentive. He maintained his position several feet away, allowing the puppy this moment of self-sufficiency while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. The balance he struck between protection and permission demonstrated an almost parental understanding of developmental needs. When the puppy had finished drinking, it turned to face the daunting return journey. The path back to their resting place, which had seemed challenging but manageable during the outward journey, now appeared impossibly long to the exhausted puppy. Its legs trembled with fatigue, and its breathing came in short, rapid pants. It had reached its limit. After a moment's hesitation, turned toward Thunderheart and let out a small, questioning bark, its first vocalization beyond whimpers of pain or distress. The sound hung in the air between them, a clear communication of need without demand, a request rather than an expectation. The communication, though simple, was unmistakable. The puppy had reached its limit and was requesting assistance. There was intelligence in this interaction, an understanding that help was available but needed to be explicitly solicited, a recognition of agency on both sides of the relationship. Thunderheart responded immediately, moving to the spring's edge and lowering himself to a lying position beside the exhausted puppy. There was nothing hesitant in his response, no calculation of cost or benefit, simply the immediate fulfillment of a request from his companion. With the last of its energy, the small dog dragged itself onto Thunderheart's foreleg, collapsing against the horse's chest in complete trust. When the stallion rose, he did so with exquisite care, keeping his body perfectly level to avoid dislodging his passenger. Each leg was placed with deliberate precision as he carried the puppy back to their usual resting place beneath the largest juniper tree in the valley, where the small dog promptly fell into the deep sleep of the genuinely fatigued. This pattern, independence followed by assistance when needed, became a feature of their interactions in the days that followed. The puppy would push its boundaries, attempting increasingly challenging movements and explorations, secure in the knowledge that Thunderheart would intervene if necessary. This security, paradoxically, enabled greater independence, as the puppy felt free to take risks that might otherwise have been too intimidating. As the second week began, the puppy's improvement accelerated. Its coat, now mostly clean through its own grooming efforts, gleamed with health in the sunlight. The raw spots had begun to heal, forming pink scar tissue that would eventually be covered by new fur. Its body had filled out, the dangerous emaciation giving way to the healthy plumpness of puppyhood. Most importantly, it had mastered the art of three-legged mobility, moving with increasing confidence and speed despite its handicap. What had begun as an awkward hop-drag gait had evolved into a surprisingly efficient tripod movement, with the puppy's body making automatic compensations for the missing support of its right hind leg. It could now navigate most of the valley's terrain, avoiding only the steepest or rockiest areas. The right leg, however, remained problematic. Though the swelling had subsided somewhat, the limb still could not bear weight. When at rest, the puppy held it slightly elevated, the paw curled inward in a way that suggested nerve damage. Occasionally, it would attempt to use the leg, placing it gingerly on the ground, but any pressure resulted in immediate pain and withdrawal. Thunderheart seemed to understand the permanence of this injury. He had developed a habit of walking on the puppy's right side, positioning himself where the dog was most vulnerable. When they traversed uneven terrain, he would slow his pace to match the puppy's more cautious progress. These accommodations were made without any apparent conscious thought, simply the natural adjustments of one being to another's needs. Yet despite this permanent impairment, the puppy's spirit seemed undiminished. It had begun to display moments of pure puppyhood, playfully tugging at tufts of grass, rolling on its back in patches of sunlight, even attempting to chase its own tail, a particularly challenging endeavor given its mobility issues. These bursts of normal behavior were interspersed with longer periods of rest, but their very existence spoke to an indomitable will to thrive. One particularly memorable afternoon, the puppy discovered a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. With the focused intensity unique to young predators, it crept toward the insect. Body low to the ground, movements slow and deliberate. The butterfly, sensing the approach, fluttered to another bloom several feet away. Undeterred, the puppy followed, maintaining its stalking posture despite the awkwardness of three-legged movement. This game continued for nearly 10 minutes. The butterfly moving from flower to flower, the puppy following with unwavering determination. Thunderheart observed from nearby, his grazing interrupted by apparent interest in this hunting exercise. When the butterfly finally flew high enough to escape the puppy's attention, the small dog sat back on its haunches, looking somewhat disappointed but also invigorated by the chase. Thunderheart appeared to recognize and encourage these playful moments. Once, when the puppy was particularly energetic, the stallion initiated a game of sorts, gently pushing a small branch toward the puppy with his nose. The branch, a fallen juniper twig with a few dried berries still attached, skittered across the ground, immediately capturing the puppy's attention. The small dog pounced on this offering with enthusiasm, gripping it in its teeth and shaking it with the instinctive side-to-side motion of a predator dispatching prey. When Thunderheart reached down to reclaim the stick, the puppy playfully resisted, and a very gentle tug-of-war ensued. The sight was extraordinary. A 1,000-pound wild horse playing carefully with a 3-pound puppy, moderating its immense strength to accommodate its companion's fragility. These play sessions became a regular feature of their days, occurring most often in the cooler morning and evening hours, when both had more energy. They seemed to serve multiple purposes: exercise for the puppy, mental stimulation for both, and a deepening of the bond between them. Each game reinforced their connection, building a relationship that transcended the initial rescue dynamic. By the end of the second week, a transformation had occurred that went beyond physical healing. The puppy, though still unnamed and unclaimed by human hands, had found its place in the world, not in a human home as nature might have intended for a domestic breed, but in the wild, alongside the most unlikely of companions. Its identity had been reshaped by circumstance, creating a unique being that was neither fully domestic nor truly wild, but something new and undefined. And Thunderheart, the once solitary stallion, had expanded his understanding of family beyond all natural boundaries. His existence, previously defined by the rhythms of survival and solitude, now incorporated responsibility for another. His decisions now considered the welfare of his small companion, adding a layer of complexity to his wild freedom. Their days now followed a comfortable routine. Mornings began with Thunderheart's fishing expeditions, providing breakfast for the puppy. The horse had developed an almost ceremonial approach to this task, standing motionless at the spring's edge until the perfect moment, then striking with precision to secure a meal for his companion. He would deliver the fish with gentle dignity, watching as the puppy consumed its breakfast with increasing manners, no longer gulping food with desperate hunger, but eating with the measured pace of the properly nourished. After breakfast came a period of exploration, with the puppy practicing its mobility by investigating different parts of the valley, while Thunderheart grazed nearby, always keeping his charge within sight. These explorations grew more ambitious as the puppy's confidence increased. It began to develop favorite spots: a sun-warmed rock perfect for afternoon naps, a patch of particularly soft grass ideal for rolling, a shallow depression that collected rainwater and attracted interesting insects. Afternoons were for rest during the desert heat, both creatures seeking shade together. They would often lie beneath the largest juniper tree, whose ancient branches created a natural canopy against the sun's intensity. The puppy would sometimes sleep pressed against Thunderheart's side, while other times it would sprawl a short distance away, exhibiting the growing independence of maturing youth. Evenings brought another fishing session, followed by what could only be described as companionable relaxation as horse and dog settled side by side to watch the stars emerge. These quiet moments seemed to hold a special significance for both. A time of peaceful coexistence after days filled with the challenges of survival and recovery. The puppy would often gaze up at the night sky with apparent wonder, while Thunderheart maintained a protective vigilance, his senses attuned to the subtle changes that nightfall brought to their sanctuary. Communication between them had evolved into something remarkable. What had begun as basic signals of need and response had developed into a sophisticated system of interaction. The puppy now used different barks and yips to express various needs or observations, which Thunderheart seemed to understand perfectly. A sharp, single bark might indicate excitement or discovery, while a softer, repeated vocalization often preceded a request for assistance or attention. The horse, in turn, had developed a range of nickering sounds and body postures that conveyed clear messages to his small friend. A low, rumbling whicker often preceded the delivery of food, while a higher-pitched neigh might serve as a warning or alert. His ear positions, forward, back, or swiveling, provided additional context to these vocalizations, creating a nuanced language understood by both. They had created, in essence, their own private language, a bridge between species that should have been separated by natural barriers. This communication system allowed for increasingly complex interactions, facilitating a relationship that deepened with each passing day. One evening, as they rested together watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the puppy initiated a new form of contact. Rather than simply lying beside Thunderheart as usual, it carefully climbed onto the horse's outstretched foreleg, worked its way up to his shoulder, and settled into the slight depression where neck met back. From this elevated position, it surveyed their valley kingdom with apparent satisfaction, occasionally nuzzling into Thunderheart's mane as if expressing gratitude for this new perspective. The horse accepted this liberty with equanimity, adjusting his position slightly to provide a more secure perch for his small passenger. There was something profoundly touching about the scene. The massive wild stallion serving as willing mount for a 3-pound puppy, their silhouette against the sunset sky creating an image that defied all natural expectations. As the third week dawned, both seemed content with their arrangement, having found in each other something that neither could have anticipated needing. Thunderheart, a focus for his protective instincts and a companion to break his solitude. The puppy, a protector and provider who asked nothing in return for his care. Their bond, forged in crisis and strengthened through recovery, had created a relationship unlike any other in the natural world. The puppy's health had stabilized into a new normal. While it would never regain use of its right hind leg, it had adapted remarkably to 3-legged mobility. Its body had compensated for the imbalance, developing stronger muscles on its functioning side and adjusting its center of gravity to maintain stability. What had initially been an awkward hop-drag gait had evolved into a surprisingly efficient tripod movement that allowed for running, playing, and exploring with minimal limitation. Thunderheart, too, had adapted to this new chapter in his life. His wild instincts remained sharp. He still maintained vigilant awareness of his surroundings and responded to potential threats with appropriate caution. But these instincts now encompassed protection of his small companion. His daily patterns had adjusted to accommodate the puppy's needs, creating a shared routine that served them both. The valley itself seemed to have accepted this unusual partnership, the other creatures that called this place home, the birds, reptiles, insects, and small mammals, had grown accustomed to the presence of horse and dog. What had initially caused alarm or flight now barely warranted notice as the natural world adapted to this unnatural alliance. Both Thunderheart and the puppy had reached a state of equilibrium, healthy, secure, and connected in a relationship that defied categorization but functioned with remarkable harmony. They had created, in this hidden valley, a world of their own making, governed by rules of their own design. But the world beyond their hidden valley continued to turn, and forces were in motion that would soon challenge the sanctuary they had created together. For while nature might allow such an extraordinary partnership to flourish in isolation, the wider world, particularly the human world, operated by different rules. And that world was about to intrude on their private paradise in ways neither could anticipate. The first sign came in the form of distant sounds, the mechanical growl of engines echoing faintly from beyond the valley's protective walls. These sounds had occasionally reached their sanctuary before, but always as distant, irrelevant background noise. Now they seemed closer, more persistent, a harbinger of approaching change. Thunderheart noticed first, his ears swiveling toward the sound, his body tensing slightly as he processed this potential threat. The puppy, attuned to its companion's reactions, picked up on this subtle shift in demeanor, looking up questioningly at the horse before turning its own attention to the unfamiliar noises. Neither could know that just beyond the ridge that had sheltered their valley, human plans were being made, plans involving surveys and development, maps and boundaries, the relentless expansion of civilization into the diminishing wilderness. Neither could understand that their sanctuary existed on borrowed time, that the human world had already marked this land for transformation. For now, they remained in their hard-won paradise, their extraordinary bond a testament to the unexpected connections that can form when circumstance overrides instinct. But the encroaching sound served as a reminder that no sanctuary lasts forever, that change is the only constant in a world where humanity's reach continues to extend into even the most remote corners of the wild. The sun set on the 21st day of their partnership, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Thunderheart and the puppy settled into their usual evening positions, the small dog curled against the horse's warm flank, both facing westward as the day's final light painted the sky in spectacular colors. Neither could know what challenges the coming days would bring. But whatever awaited them, they would face it as they had faced everything since that first fateful encounter. Together, defying all odds and expectations.